Hello, this is Mr. Kashmir, and this is Theater Arts Unit 3, Lecture A. As this is the first of the 8 course reader lectures, just an extra word before we get started, so you know what's coming. Following the title slide, I'll walk you through 4 slides. I will do this in this lecture, and in lecture B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. The 4 slides will be the big idea of the course reader, what's in it, what to look for and how to read it, and optional pages and miscellaneous notes. Those will be the 4 slides after the title slide in all 8 lectures. So again, it's the big idea of the reader, the contents of the reader, how to read the reader, and any optional pages and/or miscellaneous notes. I recommend that you watch and take notes on this on the back of the title page of Course Reader A, and that you get in the habit of doing this for all 8 course readers. The big idea in this course reader is a little different than the other 7 course readers. In the other 7 course readers, we'll actually be looking deeply at sort of one specific instance or one specific artist or type of art reacting to a certain type of social oppression or injustice. In this course reader, we're actually going to be looking at 4 scenarios that really have nothing to do with one another on the surface, but are all tied together by a common thread. And that thread is that there is an inextricable link between war and the arts. And so, on the one hand, you have war, which has plagued this country and this world in which we live for hundreds and thousands of years. On the other hand, you have the arts, not something you generally associate with war. Things like painting, things like plays, things like books. And we're going to look at different ways in which the arts have reacted against war, ways in which the arts have reflected the horrors of war, and ways in which artists have become a part of the conversation around war. I want you to take 1 in this course reader, Howard Zinn, 2 in this course reader, Electra in Derry, 3 in this course reader, Picasso's Guernica, and 4 in this course reader, Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, each as 4 individual sort of miniature case studies. And when you get to the end, you'll take some time to draw together what they have in common. And you'll come to an idea linked to this one here, that there is, after all, an inextricable link between war and the arts. So, what's in this course reader? Well, first up, you have Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn is a famous historian, a very liberal historian, most famous for writing A People's History of the United States. And Howard Zinn has always been interested in how do we tell the stories in our history that are not often being told here in America. The stories of minorities, the stories of women, the stories of people who have tried to change the world for the better, stood up to war, stood up to greed, those kinds of things. You're going to read 2 pieces by Howard Zinn. In A1, you're going to read a piece of his called Artists in Times of War. And this is an adaptation, or rather an edited version of a talk that he gave. I believe it was back in 2001 initially. And what it's about is the role of artists in responding to war. The second piece that you're going to read by Howard Zinn, which is labeled A2, is called Stories Hollywood Never Tells. And in that one, you're going to be reading about all of these stories throughout American history that never seem to make it to the big screen. And Howard Zinn is going to sort of talk through what he thinks about that and why he thinks that might be, and what stories he thinks we should, as artists, be telling to our fellow countrymen and to our children. The next thing you're going to read, number 2, Electra in Derry. It's actually only 1 page, front and back. That's reading A3. And Electra in Derry is the story of a woman named Fiona Shaw. She's an Irish actress, and she was playing the lead in a production of Electra in Northern Ireland at a time when Northern Ireland was going through great violence and turmoil. And it's just a short and very moving story about the way in which doing this Greek tragedy from thousands of years ago had this very profound impact on people who were suffering from violence in the modern era. The next thing, number 3 here, Guernica. When you come to A4, you're going to be reading about this painting by Pablo Picasso called Guernica. On the top of page A4, you'll actually see the painting, although it's much, much larger than the reproduced image that you'll see. In A4, you'll simply read about the making of the painting itself and how the painting came about. In A5 and A6, you'll read about an instance that occurred not too long ago, where a copy of the painting in the United Nations actually had to be covered up because it's such a strong anti-war statement. And there was a day where America's Secretary of State was going to the United Nations to make the case for war against Iraq. And before he went to make the case for war, they covered up the painting and silenced this image for fear that the anti-war image juxtaposed with the Secretary of State calling for war would be problematic. And it's a really incredible, gives you a really incredible sense of the degree to which governments sometimes feel they need to go to silence the voice of artists who speak out against war. A final note about that, A.6.1 is not a reading, it's just a photograph. And it's actually a photograph of people looking at Picasso's original Guernica, which hangs in Madrid. I've seen it myself in person. It's the most memorable experience I've ever had of looking at a piece of art. It's truly moving. And I showed you this picture, 8.6.1, because I wanted you to see the size of the painting. So you can see how small the people are and how large the painting is, and it gives you a sense of sort of the epic scale of that painting. The last thing you'll read is you'll do a little bit of reading about Uncle Tom's Cabin. The Uncle Tom's Cabin reading is about 4 pages. Uncle Tom's Cabin is a book that was published not too long before the Civil War started. It dealt with slavery. It's a work of fiction. And it was incredibly popular, a huge bestseller, and changed the minds of a lot of Northerners as they contemplated issues of slavery and issues of war. It was later turned into a play, was done in many different areas of the country, and you should get from that reading a sense of how powerful that piece of art was in changing the minds of the Northerners leading up to the Civil War. All right, so now what I'm going to talk to you about briefly is what you should look for and how to read this. For A1 and A2, I want you to look for 2 things only, thesis and supports. So what is it that Howard Zinn is arguing in his 2 pieces, and how does he support those arguments? And that's it. I don't want you to get too bogged down in little individual details. He's going to talk about a lot of artists, he's going to tell a lot of stories, and I do want you to work to understand what you're reading. But the more important part is I want you to work to understand the big picture. So what you're looking for is, what are Howard Zinn's 2 arguments? And the way to find those is to identify thesis and supports. For A2, for A3, I really want you to be looking for Goldhill's point about Greek tragedy. What point does he make? And I want you to be looking for a clear understanding of the story of what happened in Derry on those nights when Electra was performed. For A4 all the way up through A.6.1, I want you to understand what is the painting. I want you to understand in A5 and A6, I want you to work to understand the situation surrounding the painting in 2003, many, many years after it was made. and I want you to work to understand the details of the situation around that painting at the United Nations. So it's, what is the painting itself? Where did it come from? What's it about? And when? So kind of the who, what, when. And then also the 2003 UN story. Make sure you have the outline of that story clear in your head or in your annotations. And finally, for A7 through A9, I want you to look for the who, what, when of the book and the story itself. So who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin? When was it written? What was it about? And I want you to look for the impact of that book. On this final slide, in terms of optional pages and miscellaneous notes, for A1, you will skip the first half of the page, which is just a bunch of things that you don't need about the journal where this was taken from. Not important. At the bottom of A1, however, there's an abstract. For those of you that may have taken AP Psych, you might know this. An abstract is a quick summary of what you're about to read. Definitely read the abstract. At the end of A1, definitely skip the work cited, obviously. But at the very end of A1, on page 9 of A1, there's an author's profile, and I do suggest that you take a quick look at that. For A2, I want to encourage you not to get too bogged down in each individual story. I'm not telling you to skim it necessarily. I'm just telling you I want you to look for overall ideas and what ties the stories together, as opposed to getting bogged down in the details of every individual story. No special notes here for A3. If you take a look at A4, on the third page of A4, there's a section called Notes. It's crossed out. It's crossed out for a reason. I don't want you to read it. Last thing I'll say here, I highly recommend using the information in the previous slides, especially slides 2, 3, and 4, to double check that you're looking for the big ideas that I've asked you to look for. A great thing to do is to jot down the notes on the lecture video note page, and then after you've read each piece, either at the beginning or the end, do a quick summary of big ideas that links to the big ideas I asked you to look for. And a final recommendation, and it's up to you whether you want to do this or not, but somewhere in here, maybe even on the cover page, so on like the very, very front, on the side where you put your name and period, in the big empty white space, this is just a recommendation. What I would recommend is look back to slide 2 of this presentation at the big idea, copy it down, and then maybe write yourself 3 or 4 sentences about how the readings support that big idea and what you learned. This has the dual benefit of helping you to ensure that you've made good meaning as you've read and take the extra time to think it through before you put it down and do your next set of homework. And then also, when you come back to it, the big ideas will be right there for you. So I wish you the best with this first course reader. Break a leg.